On the night of the couple's dinner, I saw my wife enter the restaurant hand in hand with the man who, until then, I had thought was just a distant acquaintance. He was smiling, with that self-confident smile of someone who believes they have one. And she was beautiful. She was wearing the dress I had given her for our last wedding anniversary, the same one she said she saved for special occasions. That night, apparently, was special enough. When they approached our table, I stood up calmly, even with the blood boiling in my veins. I looked into her eyes that had cried with me so many times, that had asked me for forgiveness in other foolish arguments in life, and I said without trembling, with the dry, choked pain in my throat, "I'm glad you chose the one you really love, forget me once and for all, and wait for the divorce decree." She didn't cry. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't look at me with pity or regret. She just pursed her lips, as if I were some inconvenience, and turned her face away as if turning the page. But what she didn't know, was that that night wouldn't be the end of my pain. It would be the beginning of hers. Up until that moment, everything I had thought about betrayal was still theoretical. It was the pain of others. The pain of fiction. The pain of stories that you hear and feel from afar. But there, in front of her and the man with whom she shared secrets while lying in my bed, I discovered what it was like to feel your stomach churn, your legs lose strength and your heart squeeze as if it were being crushed inside your chest. I left without looking back, but my body was shaking. The pain was not just emotional. It was physical. It was a constant nausea, as if my body knew that something rotten had settled inside me. The days that followed were dark, colorless, soundless. I remember opening the cupboards and seeing the wine glasses we had chosen together, the embroidered tablecloth she insisted on bringing from the trip to Tuscany, the notes we had left on the fridge with silly messages, everything there screamed her name. Everything. And yet, she was out there, living a new story with another man. Without remorse. Without hesitation. As if I never existed. But fate, that old friend of those who suffer in silence, likes to return the pieces to the board with irony. A few days later, she sent me a cold, bureaucratic message, asking about the divorce papers. I replied that they were already being taken care of, and that she would receive a letter in the next few days. She didn't reply. I thought that was it. The end. But when she opened the letter, something changed. She called. She sent messages. She sent audio messages. She asked to talk. She said she needed to see me. She said she made a mistake, that she didn't know what she was doing, that it was all an impulse. And then came the sentence that I will never forget, "I think I let myself be carried away by an illusion. I didn't know you would have the courage to leave me like this, for real." And that's when I understood, her regret wasn't out of love, it was out of loss. She lost her footing. She lost control. And with it, she lost me. She tried to get back together. She insisted on meeting up. She sent old photos of us, voice messages crying in the middle of the night. And me? I listened to everything with the cruel calm of someone who no longer feels. As if my heart had been numbed. As if the pain had burned everything inside. Until one day, she wrote me a letter, saying that she had broken up with the other man. That she was alone. That she missed me, and that she still believed that we could rebuild what we had. But what she didn't know, is that that other man had already done to her exactly what she did to me, he abandoned her. Coldly. Without warning. He used her as a trophy, a challenge, and when he got what he wanted, he discarded her without ceremony. She found out through a text message. A random woman sent her a photo of him with another woman. A younger, prettier woman. The caption read, "I hope you didn't believe he was only yours. He belongs to whoever he wants to be." And that was when her world fell apart. It was at that moment that she came to me in desperation. She wanted to talk. She wanted to get back together. She wanted the comfort I gave her, the peace that only those who truly love can offer. But I was no longer that man. Because while she was immersed in the chaos of her choice, I began to find myself again. I remember the day I decided to leave home alone for the first time, not to distract myself, but to live. And it was on a normal afternoon, in a random cafe in the city, that I met sincere eyes that truly listened to me. A look that didn't judge, that didn't ask for anything, that just smiled. A smile that reminded me that love, even when destroyed, can be born again. And when the traitor found out about this, when she realized that I was not only moving on, but flourishing, she imploded. She wrote me one last letter. Long, desperate. With words that should have been said years ago. She said she woke up crying, that she couldn't look at herself in the mirror. She said that everything we had built was irreplaceable, that she had given everything to a man who didn't even deserve her gaze. And that now, alone, she lived with the cruelest regret of all, that of having destroyed the only man who had loved her without asking for anything in return. But it was too late. I didn't hold a grudge. Or hate. There was just no more room for her in me. Everything she once was turned to ash, scattered by the wind of a wrong choice. Meanwhile, I started over. Calmly, cautiously, with wounds still exposed, but with the certainty that I had survived. And more than that, I had won. I had won the grief of a betrayed love. I had won the need to get back the one who broke me. I had won the pain of abandonment. But the story doesn't end there. Because there was a night, much later, when I received an unexpected message. An unknown number, a simple text, "You need to know the truth." That night, wasn't the first time. And with that, a flood of memories came flooding back. The story, which until then seemed to have taken enough turns, still held a secret. Something that not even I, at my lowest moment, could have imagined. Something that rewrites everything I thought I knew about that relationship. And about myself. And that's why this story needs to be told from the beginning. Because what seemed like a simple betrayal, was, in fact, just the surface. An entire abyss hides beneath a well-told lie. And it is in this abyss that lies the truth that she tried so hard to hide. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support, encourage, or romanticize cheating. All the stories you hear are fictional, but based on real situations, created with a single purpose, to show how infidelity is capable of destroying lives, families, and trusts that took years to build. Get ready, because today's story is shocking, intense, and will stir your emotions. Good story. Daniel and Sophia's story began like many others, with casual encounters, messages exchanged late at night, and a silent chemistry that seemed to emerge even in the silences between sentences. He was a civil engineer, methodical, observant, someone who believed that love was built with the same pillars as a house: structure, effort, maintenance. She, a literature teacher, was light and expressive, with a passionate way of seeing the world, of being enchanted by details that most people overlook. While he saw time in blocks of time, she saw it in seasons and sensations. But there was one point where they both met, the mutual desire to build something real. From the beginning, they were willing to give in, to listen, to start over. The wedding came after 3 years of intense dating, and it didn't take long for them to become the kind of couple that their friends admired, but couldn't explain exactly why. It wasn't just beauty or compatibility. It was that impression of partnership, of sincere connection. And for years, it was like that. Daniel was a man of simple habits. He woke up early, enjoyed the smell of fresh coffee, and had the habit of reading the newspaper on Sundays while listening to jazz at a low volume. He was reserved, but extremely present. He never forgot a date, a gesture, a word she said in vulnerable moments. Over time, he began to earn the affectionate nickname of the couple's memory, because he kept memories that not even Sophia knew still existed. When they renovated the house where they lived, he was the one who planned every detail, thinking about her comfort, her favorite armchair near the window, the indoor garden with lavender that she loved so much, the bathtub with a view of the sunset. He was rational, but passionate in the way he cared. His way of saying, "I love you," was in every gesture, every small daily care. Sophia, on the other hand, had a restless soul. She was always involved in cultural projects, poetry readings, school events, and readings of old poems or contemporary authors. She was surrounded by books, colored pens, diaries, and words written on loose sheets of paper. Her emotions came to the surface easily. She cried watching silly movies, smiled when she heard birds on the porch, was enchanted by the smell of rain, and would stay pensive for hours when she read a verse by Neruda. She brought color to Daniel's life, challenging his rigidity with her spontaneity, opening cracks where before there was only concrete. When they fought, she was always the one who made the first move, with handwritten letters, notes left on the mirror, or a song she knew he liked playing in the background, creating an atmosphere that dissolved hurts without needing many words. They had solid plans. They talked about children, trips to Europe, and a country house in the future. They loved to gather friends for themed dinners. Sophia cooked with enthusiasm and Daniel took care of the meticulous organization of the table. Everyone admired the couple's harmony. It was as if they knew exactly where the other ended and where they began. They had small rituals that seemed silly to others, but that sustained their relationship: a handshake before bed, a new recipe on Sundays, a walk hand in hand in the neighborhood park once a month, without exception. Nothing seemed to shake the structure built over the years. Even financial difficulties or routine conflicts were faced with a kind of serenity that came from complicity. It was not an exaggerated love or full of public declarations, but one that grew silently, sustained by looks that said it all. Their surroundings also reflected this stability. They lived in a quiet residential neighborhood, in a charming house with a white facade and blue-framed windows. They were close to their neighbors, participated in community events, and had a balanced social circle. Daniel was respected among his co-workers, known for his ethics and firmness. Sophia was loved by her students, parents, and the school administration. It was common to see thank you letters on her desk, drawings from the children, and small mementos left by parents grateful for her affection and dedication. Both were seen as examples of commitment and integrity. Nothing, absolutely nothing, suggested that anything could go wrong. However, routine, with its silent way of wearing them down, began to invade the space between them. There were no serious fights, no shouting, no slamming of doors. But small separations began to set in. Daniel, absorbed in a new urban development project, began to arrive later. Sophia, involved in a literary workshop outside of her usual shift, also stayed out longer. Meals together decreased, silent Sundays became less frequent, and walks in the park began to be cancelled for reasons that, at first glance, seemed justifiable. Before they knew it, they were sleeping later, talking less, and their rituals began to fail. A night without a handshake, a Sunday without a new dish, a Wednesday without a goodnight kiss. And neither of them commented on it. Perhaps for fear of admitting that something was changing. Still, there was affection. There was effort. Daniel, even though he was tired, brought her flowers once a week. He suffered in silence when he realized she forgot to put them in the vase. Sophia, in turn, made a point of preparing his favorite dish on Friday nights, even when he said he wasn't hungry. They were both trying to keep the flame of something alive that they weren't sure if it still burned with the same intensity. And even though the happy moments still existed, they began to be crossed by uncomfortable silences, distractions and lost looks. Conversations about children, which used to be full of excitement, were now accompanied by, "Let's leave that for later," or, "I don't know if now is the best time." The house, which used to be full of sounds and life, began to seem too big for two. Deep down, they both felt it. But they chose not to talk about it. Maybe out of fear of facing what might come to light. Maybe because they believed it was just a phase. And in phases, Sophia said, we need to know how to wait. Daniel, more pragmatic, said that love is like a construction site, sometimes cracks appear, but if there is a good structure, they can be repaired. But there is not always enough cement for everything. Still, they kept going. Because there were memories, there was history, there were promises. And that was exactly why they accepted the invitation to the couple's dinner. A gathering organized by old friends, at an elegant restaurant in the city, where each couple would bring their own story to be celebrated with laughter, wine and shared memories. Sophia saw this as an opportunity to get closer. She planned the dress, booked an appointment at the salon, and told her friends how excited she was. Daniel, in turn, saw it as a symbol. Being with her there, in public, alongside other couples, was reaffirming their commitment, even if things weren't the same inside. He even thought about writing something nice for her that night. A card. A phrase that would remind her of who they were. He thought about it and put it off until later. A later that would never come. Nothing indicated what was to come. Nothing on Sophia's face, in her usual soft gestures, in the hurried kisses they still exchanged in the morning. Nothing in Daniel's silence, in his silent dedication to work, in the way he folded her clothes even when he was exhausted. Both of them, in their own way, still believed they were building something. Maybe out of stubbornness. Maybe out of hope. And that's why that dinner would change everything. And it would leave marks that no routine, no apology, no new beginning could erase. But that hadn't happened yet. They were still on the threshold of what separates comfort from illusion and stability from lies. They were still, in everyone's eyes, the couple who loved each other. And that's exactly where the real story begins. In the days leading up to the couple's dinner, there was an air of anxiety contained in every gesture between Daniel and Sophia. They were both unconsciously trying to rescue something that seemed to be slowly falling apart, like an old linen cloth that begins to tear at the edges, silently. Daniel started arriving home from work a little earlier, avoiding evening meetings, ignoring invitations to happy hour with his colleagues. Sophia, on the other hand, seemed more involved in preparing the house, rearranging flowers, changing cushions, rehearsing dishes that she could make for them after dinner, as if she were trying to create an atmosphere that would bring together what daily life had separated. She used sweet words, delicate gestures, a new perfume that he didn't recognize, but that enveloped her with an aura of different lightness, almost theatrical. He noticed every detail, but chose not to question it. Perhaps out of fear of the answer, perhaps because of a remnant of faith that made him believe that everything could, with patience, go back to its place. The days flowed by with small kindnesses. A good morning message in the middle of the workday, a lingering touch on the hand, a smile among forgotten smiles. But behind the appearances, there was a silence that began to scream between the two. Daniel realized, one night, that he no longer knew when Sophia had stopped sharing her concerns with him. She talked about trivial things, but avoided telling him how she felt. Their conversations seemed staged, and their hugs, although frequent, carried a subtle strangeness, as if her body was there, but her soul was far away. Still, he insisted. He wanted to believe that all of this was just a phase, and that dinner would be the perfect opportunity to rekindle the thread of love that, although weakened, he still felt alive. On the night of the event, Daniel chose the blue shirt she always complimented. He took his time taking a shower, shaved with precision and bought a white rose to discreetly hand out on the way, a simple but symbolic gesture. When he saw her ready, he felt a twinge in his chest. Sophia looked stunning. The tight black dress with delicate details on the back, her hair tied in a soft bun, her eyes highlighted with makeup that accentuated their depth. For a moment, Daniel had the illusion that she had gotten ready for him. And that was enough to make him forget, even if temporarily, the doubts that were silently consuming him. On the way to the restaurant, they spoke little. She seemed focused on something he couldn't access, as if she were mentally somewhere else. He, in turn, tried to disguise the tension with silly questions, comments about the traffic, compliments about the background music. When they arrived, they were greeted by friends in a festive mood, hugs, toasts and shared laughter. The restaurant was elegantly decorated, with low lighting, candles on the tables and soft instrumental music filling the space between words. Everything seemed perfect for a memorable evening. During dinner, Daniel tried to connect, looking into her eyes, touching her hand under the table. Sophia, however, often looked away, fiddled with her cell phone, looked around as if she were looking for something, someone. He began to notice the signs more clearly, the restlessness in her fingers, the automatic smile, the gaze that avoided his for more than 3 seconds. The wine helped to disguise the tension, and the conversations of the other couples served as a shield for the discomfort that was growing between them. Daniel didn't know if it was just his imagination, but with each passing hour, he felt that something was out of place. Not only between them, but there, in the room, as if a strange presence was hiding among the perfectly folded cutlery and napkins. That was when he saw her discreetly get up. She said she was going to the bathroom, smiled gently, touched his shoulder lightly and walked with controlled steps towards the hallway. Daniel remained there, between forced laughter and attempts to stay present, but the discomfort was greater. After a few minutes, he also got up. He told a friend that he was going to get more wine. He followed the same hallway she had walked. He didn't know what he was looking for, he didn't know if he wanted to find it, but something inside him pushed his steps with silent urgency. And then, at the end of the hallway, before turning the corner to the bathrooms, he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. On the other side of the hall, there was a discreet entrance to a private room, used for private dinners. The door was ajar. And instinctively, he looked. Inside, he saw Sophia. Not alone. She was with another man. A face he had seen before, but had never paid attention to. Perhaps an acquaintance from previous events, someone who appeared in distant photos on her social media. It wasn't the touch on his arm, nor the smile she reserved only for close friends, nor the way she leaned toward him that hurt the most. It was the sparkle in her eyes. A sparkle he hadn't seen in months. A sparkle he thought had faded with time, with the weariness of life as a couple. But there, she shone. Daniel couldn't go in. Or confront her. He just backed away. He went back to the dining room, looked at his laughing friends, at the nearly empty plates, at the half-empty glass of wine. He sat down slowly, his heart racing, his eyes moist. He tried to maintain his composure. He didn't want to cause a scene. Not here. Not in the face of so many stories that believed he and Sophia were still examples. Minutes later, she came back to the table, smiling, with a practiced lightness, and touched his arm as if nothing had happened. But he didn't feel anything anymore. No warmth, no affection. Just a sharp chill down his spine, and a nausea in the pit of his stomach. Something inside him had been ripped out. On the way home, there was absolute silence. Sophia pretended that everything was fine, played with her cell phone, hummed along to a song playing on the radio. Daniel drove as if he were going through a dark, endless tunnel. When they parked, she got out first, went into the house, took off her shoes, and went to the bedroom. He stayed in the car for more than 20 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to figure out what to do with it. What to say. If it was worth confronting. If there was still something to save. But no answer came. Only the image of her, leaning over, smiling at another man, etched like a burning tattoo in his memory. That morning, Daniel didn't sleep. He walked around the house in silence, touching objects that once meant something but now seemed empty. He looked at the photo of the two of them on the shelf, taken on an old trip, and felt like he was looking at two strangers. She sat on the couch, opened her laptop and started writing. Loose words, disconnected sentences, but little by little they took shape. She didn't know exactly what she would say, but she knew she needed to transform that lump in her throat into something concrete. A letter. Not to her. But to yourself. A silent farewell, an internal release. When morning came, she took a shower, got dressed, left the house without making a sound and went to work as if nothing had happened. In the following days, he pretended to be normal. He prepared the groundwork. He organized documents. He transferred accounts. He sorted papers. Without her realizing, he began the process of liberation. Sophia, on the other hand, continued her routine as normal. The affectionate messages returned, the improvised dinners, the more constant smiles. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe out of an unconscious attempt to keep up appearances. But nothing escaped Daniel anymore. Every word, every gesture, every absence. Everything was now part of a bigger picture, a truth that he could no longer unsee. And then the day of the reunion arrived. The dinner with friends, where the couples would celebrate their life together. Daniel had confirmed his presence in advance. She seemed excited. She chose a different dress this time, lighter. She insisted on going with him, hand in hand. During the journey, he remained silent. He didn't comment on the traffic or the music. He just drove, his eyes fixed on the horizon. And when they arrived, as they entered together, Sophia let go of his hand for a moment to greet someone. And at that moment, Daniel saw her. Again. With the same man. The two of them together. Smiling. Arriving as a couple. Holding hands. He didn't hesitate. He approached them both, his eyes fixed on her. Not with anger. Nor with resentment. But with the serenity of someone who no longer fears losing what has already been taken away. He said, in a firm voice, without changing his tone, "I'm glad you chose the one you truly love. Forget me once and for all, and wait for the divorce decree." And then, he simply turned his back and left the room, without looking back. At that moment, Sophia said nothing. He stood there, motionless, as if the world around him had stopped. The laughter, the music, the toasts, everything seemed to have disappeared. His body was present, but his mind was paralyzed. For the first time, he understood that perhaps he had gone too far. And I still didn't know, that what was to come would be even more painful. Because the truth she thought she knew about that story still held a secret. One that would come to light, very soon. Sophia spent the night awake. Even after Daniel left the restaurant without hesitation, with his firm voice that cut through the air like a silent blade, she still believed that it would be temporary, that he would come back, as he had done before in small arguments. For years, she had grown accustomed to the security he represented, with the certainty that, no matter what happened, he would always be there. Only this time, his gaze was different. There was an emptiness contained in the firmness of his words, an absence of visible pain, as if something inside him had been dead for a long time. And yet, even knowing this, it took her a while to assimilate it. The next morning, she tried to call, wrote messages, waited for some reaction. But he remained silent. An absolute silence. A silence that screamed louder than any argument. The following days were unbearable. Her lover, who had previously been so engaging and available, now seemed cold, evasive, full of excuses. The messages became spaced out, the meetings were cancelled, the compliments replaced by disguised criticism. Sophia began to feel a discomfort that slowly turned into anguish. She had made a choice. She had broken with the life she knew for something that was now showing its true face. And the stability that Daniel represented began to haunt her like an echo of everything she had thrown away. The house seemed strange. His perfume still lingering on the pillow, the mugs with the couple's initials, the keys he had forgotten in the drawer. Everything was proof of a story that she had broken on impulse. Out of need. Out of a fleeting desire to feel alive. But now it was too late. When the divorce letter arrived, Sophia cried. Not because she hadn't expected it. But because inside the envelope there was something else, a photograph. An image of the two of them, hugging, in the backyard, with a note on the back, "Life always takes what the rush ignores." The simple words, handwritten by Daniel, hurt more than any accusation. It was the end. And at the same time, the beginning of guilt. The real kind, the kind that doesn't go away with time, the kind that settles like a constant weight on one's shoulders. In the days that followed, Sophia tried to talk. She sent long emails, letters. She tried to contact mutual friends. And everyone politely said that he needed space. But there was something she didn't understand, he didn't seem devastated. And that ate at her even more. Because if he wasn't in pieces, then maybe she wasn't as irreplaceable as she imagined. Weeks later, Sophia decided to seek him out in person. She wanted to explain herself, to tell him that she regretted it, that it had been a mistake, that the other man was nothing more than a poorly constructed fantasy. She called him late on a Tuesday afternoon. To her surprise, he answered. His voice was calm but distant. She asked for just a few minutes, said she needed one last meeting, and after a short silence, he accepted. They arranged to meet at a small, secluded cafe. When she arrived, Daniel was already sitting down. Thinner, with a different expression, there was no anger, no sadness. There was peace. Sophia sat in silence, looked into his eyes, and felt the abyss between them. She apologized. She said she didn't want to justify it, but that everything had happened at a time when she felt invisible, forgotten. She told him how much she missed him, the home they had built. He listened to everything in silence, just stirring the coffee with his spoon, with slow movements. When she finished, she waited for a reaction. She waited for him to say something, anything. He just took a deep breath, rested his arms on the table and answered with a question, "Do you really think I found out everything that night?" Sophia widened her eyes, not understanding. She said yes, that it could only have been that night, because until then he hadn't shown anything. Daniel laughed lightly, with a smile that mixed irony and bitterness. "I knew before. No dates, no proof. But I knew. I felt it in your touch, in your gaze. I spent months fighting against it inside myself. Pretending not to see. Until I couldn't take it anymore." Sophia tried to answer, but he continued. He said he wasn't there for her. He was there because he needed to say something. Something he had kept for a long time. He pulled an envelope from his backpack, placed it on the table, but didn't hand it over. He said that inside was the last part of the story that she didn't know. Sophia frowned. Daniel took another deep breath and spoke calmly. "That man you went out with, did you really believe that he chose you because he loved you? Because he wanted a future with you?" With a trembling voice, she answered yes, she believed there was something true. Daniel then said that it wasn't just any betrayal. That man was her ex-boyfriend from her youth, an old fling, a name she barely remembered mentioning. But Daniel remembered. Because, years ago, when he was sorting through one of Sophia's boxes with old items, he found old letters, photos, memories of that past relationship. He kept everything. He never mentioned it. Until, months before the betrayal, she discovered that the man had returned to the city. She found out through a photo posted by a mutual friend on social media. And then, curiosity turned into suspicion. Suspicion turned into pain. And pain turned into strategy. Daniel revealed that for weeks he had been investigating in silence. That he had found out about secret meetings, exchanged messages, dinners. He said he knew everything even before that night at the restaurant. And that he had just waited for the right moment to let her choose. Because he needed her to make the decision on her own. Because he wanted to be sure that she was capable of hurting him of her own free will. Sophia, stunned, began to tremble. She wanted to deny it, she wanted to justify it. But he continued. "You fell into a trap set by your own ego. And worse, he didn't want you. He just wanted to prove to himself that he could still have you. And when he did, he lost interest." She didn't answer. Tears began to flow. But Daniel didn't change his tone. He said that the divorce decree wasn't just a legal conclusion. It was a symbol. That the envelope he left with her contained evidence, photos, exchanged messages, dates. Not because he wanted to expose it. But because he wanted her to know exactly what she had lost. And finally, he said in a tone that mixed compassion and freedom, "You chose to leave our world for something that didn't exist. And now, you're alone not because I abandoned you, but because you lost me long before you betrayed me. What was left of me, you no longer saw it." Sophia tried to justify herself, tried to beg for a second chance, but every word she said was drowned out by the certainty that he was no longer there for her. He stood up, left the envelope on the table, placed a $20 bill next to it, and said, "I'm not hurt anymore. I'm at peace. And that peace, you can't touch it anymore." He left the cafe without looking back. That night, alone, Sophia opened the envelope. There were the dates, the times, the screenshots. And finally, a handwritten letter. Just one sheet of paper, with a few words: "While you were looking for excitement in another body, I was trying to understand where I stopped being enough. Now I understand, I never stopped being enough. You just chose to forget." Sophia didn't sleep. In the following days, he tried to contact her. He tried to tell her that there was still love. That they could still rebuild. But Daniel never answered again. He never looked for her again. Because he was already somewhere else. A place where pain turned into learning. Where self-love was rebuilt in silence. And where, for the first time, he allowed himself to be loved again, not by who he said, but by who he proved. And Sophia, in the emptiness of what was left, understood that the true punishment for betrayal was not the loss of the other. It was the awareness that she had lost herself at the exact moment she believed she would never be left. Sophia spent days immersed in a deafening silence. The everyday sounds that once filled the empty spaces in the house now echoed like uncomfortable screams between the walls that she herself had made cold. The creak of the cupboard door, the clinking of the cutlery, the crack of the ancient wood beneath her bare feet. Everything there seemed to constantly remind her of what she had lost. But the cruelest thing was not Daniel's absence, it was the absence of herself, of what she was when she was by his side. Mistakes could no longer be justified with flimsy excuses or emotional regrets. The lover who had been the spark of a foolish escape was now completely off her radar. He had blocked her from everything. The messages she had even tried to send, the connections, all ignored. She had not even received a goodbye. And that hurt more than the betrayal itself. Because she had been used. And worst of all, she had let herself be used. The silent humiliation was a constant torture, worsened by the unchanging dignity with which Daniel chose to leave. She started going to places where she might run into him. The same cafes, the same supermarkets, the parks where they walked on Sundays. She never saw him. His absence was meticulously calculated. It was as if he had erased his own traces from the city. And she, desperate for a spark of contact, decided to go to the place where he worked. She waited outside, not knowing what she would say if she saw him. But he didn't show up. It was there, sitting on the concrete bench under the cloudy sky, that a coworker of his, unaware of anything, commented out loud to another employee, "Did you see that Daniel moved? It seems he's gone to another city. A new project, a new life. And by the looks of it, he's not coming back." The news fell like a weight on her shoulders. A planned, organized disappearance, and yet so clean, so silent. There was no scandal, there was no hatred. Just a definitive departure. Weeks turned into months. Sophia began to live in a kind of automatic mode. She worked mechanically, smiled out of obligation, slept little. At night, she returned to the house that, once lively, now seemed like a cemetery of memories. She went through old albums, reread notes that she had previously kept without value. Now each word seemed like a knife stab. One day, rummaging through one of the drawers in the living room, she found a sealed letter, in his handwriting. On the front it was written simply, "Read it when you accept that you have lost me." She hesitated. She cried with the letter in her hands. She did not open it that day. Nor the next. It took him time to admit that he had crossed a line of no return. When he finally found the courage, he opened it with trembling hands. The words were short, direct, but heavy. "I am not writing to blame you. Nor to save you. Only to tell you that I saved myself. And that, if you want to get out of this hole, you will have to do it alone." It was the first night she truly cried. Not because of the consequences, but because she finally understood the depth of what she had done. And it was there, on that cold living room floor, with her eyes burning and her breath short, that she made the decision to meet him again. Not to ask for forgiveness. Not to get back together. But to listen for the first time. She wanted to know if he had managed to be happy. If he had someone. If he had gotten over it. She needed to see in his eyes what he had not said the last time they saw each other. It was the only way to close the story inside herself. With the help of an old mutual friend, she found out where he was. A distant coastal city where he had accepted an urban project involving the revitalization of the coastline. She didn't think twice. She bought the ticket. She arrived without warning, without a plan, without courage. She spent 2 days wandering around the construction site, not knowing how to approach him. Until she saw him. On a clear morning, walking along the sand, carrying a clipboard, talking to 2 colleagues. He was different. Lighter. A kind of serenity on his face that she had never seen before. She waited until he was alone. When she got closer, he saw her from afar. His eyes didn't widen. There was no surprise. Just a neutral expression, like someone seeing something distant, unrecognizable. Sophia stopped a few steps away. She asked to talk. He hesitated. He said he didn't have much to say. But when he saw her look, that tired, crushed look that he had once loved, he decided to accept. They sat in an empty kiosk, facing the sea. The sound of the waves seemed to protect them from any interruption. She didn't know where to start. He broke the silence first. He said he didn't hold grudges. That he had learned to look at everything as a process. Sophia cringed. He said she didn't want to get back together. That she wasn't there to start over. But she needed to understand. She needed to know if he hated her. If she was, in some way, a true love. Daniel took a deep breath. He said yes. That she was the love of his life. But that a love that is not reciprocated makes him sick. And that he had to stop loving her in order to survive. He calmly told her that he had cried countless nights before he had the courage to leave. That he saw in her a lost woman, and that he had tried to save her. But that no one can save someone who chooses to drown. Sophia cried. For the first time, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. She thanked him for telling the truth. And then, with a choked voice, she asked, "Are you with someone?" He nodded. A small but genuine smile. He said he was getting to know someone. Someone who had arrived lightly, without promises, but with presence. Someone who did not need grand gestures, because she was sincere even in silence. Sophia nodded. And felt a lump in her throat that was not envy. It was the realization that she had never been that someone for him. When they stood up to say goodbye, she said she could move on now. That she needed that meeting to heal a wound. He simply said, "I hope you forgive yourself." Because I already have. And then, without kisses, without hugs, without promises, she left. She left behind not only a love, but a man who was whole even when she chose to be half. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia returned home without fantasies. Without illusions. Knowing that starting over did not mean recovering what was lost, but learning to live with the absence of what she did not know how to take care of. And Daniel, on the other side, continued with his new life. With a woman with a peaceful soul, with sunny days, with nights without nightmares. Because, in the end, life always rewards those who choose the truth, even if it costs a broken heart. Sophia walked along the sand with her shoes in her hands, the wind blowing through her hair, the low tide reflecting a hazy sky that seemed to reflect exactly what was inside her. The encounter with Daniel had given her answers that she would never have imagined hearing, but not in the way she had expected. She was not returning home with rekindled hopes or plans for reconciliation, much less with veiled promises for the future. She was returning with a truth that did not hurt violently, but that corroded with an uncomfortable slowness. He no longer belonged to her. The certainty that he had found a new path, a new woman, a new chance, invaded her chest like a confirmation of everything she had lost. It was no longer just the guilt of having betrayed someone who loved her, it was the realization that, now, he was truly happy without her. That his life had moved on without needing to look back. And there, between the smell of the sea and the heavy silence of her own footsteps, she realized that there was nothing else she could do. The days that followed were lived in a strange way, as if she were observing the world from the outside, as if she had been expelled from a script where she had previously been the protagonist. There was no longer any room for her to stand out anywhere. Her colleagues at work avoided bringing up the subject, her mutual friends seemed uncomfortable responding to her messages, and even her own family began to treat her with a delicacy that seemed more like pity. It was as if everyone had read a script that she had not yet heard, that of the woman who had lost everything and who now had to withdraw into silence. But Sophia refused this role. Not out of arrogance, but because she knew she needed to find her own meaning in order to continue, something that did not depend on the validation of others. She began to attend therapy, to delve into readings that she had previously neglected, to write short passages in notebooks, scribbling down confused thoughts that, little by little, began to organize themselves into the form of polished pain. At the same time, he began to deal with the inner gaze, the one she had avoided for so long. The gaze that said, bluntly, that she was not a victim of circumstances, nor of a cruel fate, but of her own choices. And that was the cruelest dilemma she carried. The betrayal had not been an accident, it had not been merely the result of negligence or a worn-out relationship. She had made a choice. She had allowed herself to be seduced by a selfish game, by a promise of novelty, by a mirror that only reflected her vanities and needs. And now that everything had fallen apart, the price was not only Daniel's absence, it was the weight of living with her own broken image. She started to visit the same places with new eyes. The cafes seemed to have changed their tone, the parks now seemed distant, the music playing in the stores made her feel nauseous instead of nostalgic. The house became just a roof. She rearranged everything. She sold furniture, exchanged paintings, donated books, took down photos from the walls. But nothing could erase the memory that stuck to the walls like the smell of old paint. She slept badly, woke up late, and the weekends were the hardest. On those days, loneliness seemed to scream louder. She tried to go out with friends, to distract herself, to meet new people. But it all seemed like bad theater, as if you were playing a version of yourself that no longer existed. It was on one of these empty nights that she received an unexpected message. A colleague from her old literature group, someone she had lost touch with, invited her to participate in a reading circle at an NGO that worked with women who had been victims of abusive relationships. At first, she hesitated. She thought she would have nothing to offer. But after days of reflection, she decided to go. For the first time, she wanted to be useful to someone. She wanted to stop being a regretful person and try, somehow, to transform her pain into a bridge. At the first meeting, she heard stories very different from her own. Women who had survived physical and psychological violence, and profound manipulation. And she realized that, although their stories were not similar, they had one thing in common: they were all trying to rebuild something within themselves. Sophia started going there more often. She started writing texts that she read in the circles. Not as a way to show off, but as a way to forgive herself. Little by little, she felt like she could breathe again. There was no easy redemption. There were no guarantees. But there was life after the mistake. A quieter life, perhaps more solitary, but still, a life that could be chosen every day with more awareness. One afternoon, when she was leaving the NGO, she sat on a bench and saw a common scene, a couple exchanging laughter, sharing a coffee, with looks that said more than words. And she didn't feel envy. She missed something she once had and let slip away. But, above all, she felt serenity in recognizing that now she no longer needed it to exist. That she could be enough for herself, at least for now. Meanwhile, Daniel was moving on with his life. The days by the sea had transformed him. It wasn't just the geographical distance that had given him peace, but the freedom to build something without the ghosts of the past. He met a discreet woman, who didn't make big promises, but who looked him in the eyes with raw truth. She wasn't better or worse than Sophia, but she was present. She listened attentively, laughed simply, and was not impatient or vain. With her, Daniel didn't feel like he had to prove anything. He didn't feel like he had to anticipate a possible disappointment. He could be himself, with his silences, his long pauses, his overly thought-out answers. And this feeling of lightness gradually became love without rushing, without announcements, without suffocating expectations. Even so, every now and then, he thought about Sophia. Not with resentment, but with curiosity. If she was okay. If she had understood. If she had learned. He never tried to find out. He never looked for news. Because he knew that any attempt to get back together, even if symbolic, would jeopardize the peace he had achieved. The peace of someone who had gone through the hell of disillusionment and come out the other side intact. The peace of someone who, after loving so much, had finally learned to love himself. But the memory existed, and every now and then, in the sleepless nights, he would find himself mentally reviewing old scenes, not to relive them, but to confirm that they were really in the past. And so, the two continued on. On different paths, but crossed by the same memory. With a dilemma that accompanied them in different ways, Sophia, with the pain of having caused her own ruin, and Daniel, with the responsibility of having loved someone who destroyed him, but whom he chose not to hate. Each one faced the challenge of rebuilding a new meaning for their own existence. And although they never crossed paths again, there was an invisible link between them, made of everything they were, everything they could have been, and everything they decided not to be. As time went by, and autumn replaced summer, Sophia began to dedicate herself more and more to the NGO group. She began to give short lectures on choices and consequences, always saying that she was not a psychologist or a counselor, just someone who had made a lot of mistakes and had the courage to face them head-on. Her words, however simple they were, touched people. Because they came from a place where vanity had already been destroyed, where only the raw truth of someone who knows the bitter taste of regret remained. She began to be sought out by younger women, who saw in her a kind of living reminder that certain decisions, however small they may seem, can change everything. And by assuming this role, she began to rise up again. Not to erase the past, but to give it new meaning. And while the leaves fell from the trees, she wrote. Not novels, not stories with forced happy endings. But short, intense accounts of memories that she now used as a tool. One day, an independent publisher came across her texts and proposed publishing a collection. She hesitated, but accepted. The book was released without fanfare, but found loyal readers. People who saw in her story a mirror, a warning, a confession. And Sophia, for the first time in a long time, felt proud of herself. Not for her success, but for the honesty of having rebuilt herself without pretense. Because the greatest victory, she discovered, was not to win back what she had lost, but to transform her own pain into a bridge to others. Daniel found out about the book by chance, in a bookstore. He recognized the name on the cover. He picked up the copy, flipped through a few pages, and read passages that were clearly about him. He smiled lightly. And instead of buying it, he left the book there, on the shelf. Not out of disdain. But because he understood that, in that story, he had already finished his role. He left the store with a calm heart, holding the hand of the person who now shared his days. Sophia never knew he had read it. And she didn't need to. Because some stories don't need shared epilogues. They just need endings lived with dignity. Sophia began to fill her days with a more solid routine, not in the sense of being fulfilled or free from pain, but as a way to keep her mind occupied, preventing emptiness from taking over as easily as before. Her lectures at the NGO became more and more frequent, and the impact of her texts began to arouse the interest of other institutions, women who sought in her words not only inspiration, but the feeling that it was possible to survive their own mistakes. She never romanticized what she did, never placed herself as a victim, and perhaps that was why her voice had such an impact. Her sentences were not adorned with fanciful hopes, but with an honest brutality, a truth that bled every time she admitted, out loud, that she had destroyed the only love she had for something that never really existed. And even without knowing it, it was this courage to look at herself in the mirror that kept her standing strong in front of so many women, as if, by helping them, she was also making peace with her own conscience. One night, after one of these meetings, she was approached by a young woman who did not give her name, but who asked her a direct question, with teary eyes and a low voice: "Have you really forgiven yourself? Or have you just learned to live with the guilt?" The question haunted her for days. Sophia realized that there was a big difference between redeeming oneself socially and finding peace within oneself. True forgiveness, the kind that did not depend on applause or recognition, was an internal, solitary process, and she still walked in this dark labyrinth, feeling the walls in search of a way out. She could talk about overcoming, but sometimes she still woke up with her heart in pieces, dreaming of alternative versions of what her life could have been, versions in which she had made different choices, maintained her lucidity, and most importantly, loved with more truth and less need. At the same time, Daniel continued his discreet life. He never returned to his old city. Not out of fear of reunions, but out of respect for the new story he was building. The woman he had gotten involved with was reserved, self-assured, and never tried to take Sophia's place or compete with ghosts. She was simply there, present and constant, without demanding promises. Daniel admired her for that. And it was this mutual freedom that made the relationship blossom. On some nights, they shared painful memories from the past, and he even told parts of his story with Sophia, not with spiteful details, but as someone who recognizes that loving someone, even if you lose that love, always leaves marks. His new partner understood. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. And for that very reason, he felt safer than ever to be authentic. One weekend, while visiting a book fair in a neighboring city, Daniel was invited to a chat with authors about emotional reconstruction. His name had been mentioned in a column written by a therapist who had known him from afar and admired his approach. When he accepted the invitation, he had no idea that one of the other guests would be Sophia. She had been invited at the last minute, after another author had cancelled. When she entered the small auditorium, she did not see his name on the schedule and, when she went up on the improvised stage, she stood still when she noticed his presence among the other participants. Daniel, in turn, remained calm. He greeted her with a discreet wave, without showing any tension. The audience was small, made up of students, health professionals, and some curious readers. The moderator asked questions about guilt, forgiveness, and starting over, and each person gave their own view of the world. When it was Sophia's turn, she looked directly at Daniel before speaking. Her words were not planned. She said she had learned, by force, that not every mistake can be erased, but that every mistake can be transformed. She said that love, when wounded, is not healed with flowers or pretty words, but with time, silence and sincere changes. She said that betrayal does not begin with the physical act, but much earlier, with the neglect of noticing the other person, and that this neglect, even disguised as routine, is a choice. The audience listened in absolute silence. Daniel watched her, and no longer saw the desperate woman who once begged to be heard. He saw someone who had learned to keep quiet, to listen to her own heart. When it was his turn to speak, he said that there is no such thing as a new beginning without end. And that sometimes, the greatest act of love one can have for someone is to let them go. He said that forgiving is not getting back together, and that there are loves that are born only to teach us how not to love. After the event, there was a brief cocktail party. Sophia approached and asked if she could talk. Daniel, with the same serenity as before, accepted. They sat in a secluded corner, among empty trays and forgotten paper cups. Sophia thanked him for coming. She said she didn't know he would be there, but that somehow she felt she needed to see him one more time. Daniel replied that chance sometimes offers closure that life had left pending. She, with a tired smile, confessed, "For a long time, I thought I needed to win you back. Today I know that all I needed was to listen to you, even if in silence." He nodded, and for a moment, there were no more words. Only the mutual understanding that everything was finally in its place. A few days later, Sophia was invited to give an interview on a radio show about literature and personal experiences. At the end of the recording, she received a message from Daniel. It was short, direct, and without any apparent emotion. It simply said, "I listened to your interview. You found your voice. I'm happy about that." She read the message in silence, lying on the couch, with her cell phone on her chest. She didn't respond. Not because she didn't want to, but because she understood that some words only exist to be read, not continued. It was on that day that, when she looked in the mirror, she no longer felt destroyed, guilty, or incomplete. She saw only a woman rebuilding herself. And that was enough. The following week, she received an unexpected proposal, to adapt her texts into an audiovisual format for a social project that would be shown in schools and shelters. It was a chance to transform her own pain into a learning tool for young people who were still discovering what it meant to love, choose, and accept consequences. Sophia accepted, and spent weeks immersed in the production of the scripts, carefully rewriting parts of her story, filtering her emotions, and shaping the most intense moments so that they would have educational meaning. When she saw the first recordings, she was moved. Not out of vanity, but because she realized that what she had experienced, as hard as it had been, now served a greater purpose. Meanwhile, Daniel and his new partner were making plans to travel. She had received a job offer in another country, and he was considering going with her. "Not because I needed to escape from something, but because, for the first time, I felt like I could build something from scratch, without fear of repeating past mistakes." The possibility of starting a new life in an unknown place gave him butterflies in his stomach, but also an excitement he hadn't felt in years. The day before the trip, he visited the city where it all began for the last time. He passed by his old house, now rented to another family, by the restaurant where they had dined so many times, by the street where he had seen her for the first time. He didn't feel sad. Just calm nostalgia. He walked to the bookstore where he had seen Sophia's book. It was there, still on the shelf, but now with a sticker, "Recommended." He picked up the copy, opened it to a random page, and read, "Betrayal is a choice, but so is forgiveness. And sometimes, forgiving is choosing to no longer carry the other person inside you." She closed the book, smiled discreetly, and before leaving, left a note between the pages, "You wrote your story. Now live another one." She left without buying anything. And that night, as she packed her bags, she felt that she was not just leaving a city behind, but an entire cycle. A cycle where she had loved, been destroyed, rebuilt, and finally, freed. On the other side, Sophia was also packing her bags. Not to leave, but to start a series of lectures in other regions, sharing her journey. Deep down, she knew that she would never erase the past, but now it no longer paralyzed her. It had become part of her strength. And so, the two continued, separated by choices, but connected by everything they learned. Because some stories, no matter how they end, continue to live inside those who had the courage to go through them. Daniel's final farewell took place without a party, without public farewells, without fanfare. It was like everything he had done since he decided to be reborn, discreet, firm, unchanging. At the airport, with his ticket in hand, he took one last look at that country that held so many versions of himself, the man in love, the destroyed man, the silent man, and, finally, the free man. At his side, his new companion, whose presence did not demand eternal promises but offered silent complicity, tenderly observed his calm. They did not talk about the past. Nor did they need to. Because the bond they had built was not based on old pains, but on current truths. And that was the most solid foundation Daniel had ever known. The flight took off with clear skies. And for the first time, he felt that he was not running away from anything. He was simply choosing something new. For the first time, the future was not a shadow of what had gone wrong, but a clear space where everything could finally be light. Sophia found out about his departure a few days later. She got the news on social media, after seeing a post from a mutual acquaintance. She didn't feel jealous. She didn't feel angry. She felt a kind of painful relief, like someone who finally accepts that there won't be a cinematic reunion, a last-minute reconciliation, or request for someone back. This story had come to an end. And it was a clean, inevitable, painful, but also necessary ending. She walked alone to the top of a lookout point that she used to visit in moments of decision. He took with him a copy of his own book, with handwritten notes in the margins, scribbles that weren't in the final published version. She sat on the wooden bench under the shade of a tree, and for the first time, she read each line as if it had been written by another woman. And, in a way, it was. The woman who had written those words no longer existed. And the one who read them now was more sober, more whole, less impulsive. When he finished, he closed the book gently and wrote one last note on the back cover, so that no one else has to go through what I went through to learn the value of loving truly. The audiovisual project, in turn, gained unexpected momentum. It began to be shown in public schools, seminars, and community centers. A short documentary was made based on her story, narrated in a neutral voice, interspersing simple images with real statements from women who faced the same dilemmas. Sophia was invited to give interviews, but she refused many of them. She didn't want her image to become a symbol of commercial overcoming. She wanted her story to be a tool for transformation, not a spectacle. Only when she felt that the purpose was genuine did she accept a final interview, in which she looked into the camera and said firmly, "There is no betrayal that is a momentary mistake. Every betrayal is a conscious decision. And every decision has consequences. Life takes its toll. Time takes its toll. And love only forgives up to a certain point. After that, it simply goes away." Years passed. Daniel settled in a new country, where he found peace in a simple life. He got married discreetly, far from lavish ceremonies. He adopted a dog with his partner, renovated an old house near the sea and started growing plants. His routine was calm, almost bucolic. But there was beauty in every detail. One day, while he was tending to the garden, he received a letter. No sender. No signature. Just 2 handwritten pages. Sophia, in sober words, said she didn't want to reopen anything, but just thank him. Thank him for everything he was. For having loved her when she didn't even know how to love. For having shown her, with pain and silence, the real price of her choices. And she said she had finally found peace. Not because she had won him back. But because she had learned not to lose herself anymore. Daniel read the letter under the shade of the porch. He smiled. And put it away in a box with other old mementos. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sophia, on the other hand, continued her life away from social media and exposure. She became a silent consultant for educational projects. She began to live with less, consume less, talk less. But with more presence, more care, and more listening. On one of her professional trips, she met an older man, a widower, with whom she developed a slow, almost imperceptible friendship. There was no overwhelming passion. There were no vows. There was just exchange. Respect. Long conversations. Silent walks. And little by little, a mature and sincere affection took hold, without urgency. She didn't know if it was love. But she knew it was real. And that, for her, was enough. Each one, in their own time, found a way to move on. Not without scars. But with less weight. Because life does not demand perfection, but it does demand responsibility. And when pain is used as a learning tool, it stops being a punishment and becomes a construction. Sophia never forgot Daniel. But she stopped seeking redemption through him. Daniel never forgot Sophia. But he stopped carrying what she did as a wound. And so, the story that began with a couple's dinner and ended with a divorce letter, went through all the possible stages of a great emotional tragedy: love, neglect, betrayal, the end, the new beginning, and finally, peace. If you've made it this far, comment below what you thought of this story. What lesson did it teach you? Which character touched you the most? Your opinion is important so we can continue bringing you stories that really touch your emotions. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who needs to hear this. This story shows us that betrayal destroys everything: the love, trust, self-esteem and home that took years to build. Therefore, here on this channel, we do not support any type of betrayal. All the stories are fictional and have the clear purpose of showing the painful consequences of these choices. May this reflection stay with you: one wrong choice can cost you your entire life. Think before you act.